Greetings, friends. Our briefing is devoted to exposing propaganda, lies, fakes of the aggressor state. Let's talk about how Russia is trying to legalize, in the eyes of the international community, its sham referendums that take place in the occupied territories of Ukraine. To do this, they have involved all available agents among citizens with foreign passports, which they try to present as international observers. But in fact, they are ordinary Russian propagandists. Pay attention to how they are represented by Russian state propaganda media, in particular RIA Novosti, a Russian state media agency. They quote a certain observer from Italy, Gianfranco Vestuto, who said that voting in occupied Ambrosievka takes place without violations. Who is this Gianfranco Vestuto? He is the founder of the propaganda edition Russia News, which has nothing in common neither with journalism nor with the position of the state of Italy. They also attract seemingly observers from Venezuela, which is loyal to Russia, in which they also confirmed that the sham referendum is going on without violations. Other so-called observers are also directly related to Russia. The Insider magazine reports. Thus, the French observer André Chanclutz is related to Russia. He is the leader of the France-Russia Association, who opposed the sanctions imposed on Russia after the aggression against Ukraine as a whole. The so-called observer from Slovakia, Lubica Blaskova, is actually the president of the Slovak Association of Graduates of Russian State Higher Education Institutions. The so-called German observer Thomas Rapper is actually a regular participant in Russian propaganda shows. Well, another Italian observer, who is called Eliseo Berliozi. In fact, he has the surname Bertolazzi, and he is a researcher in the Pro-Kremlin Institute for Advanced Studies in Geopolitics in Italy. Thus, the entire network of so-called observers is completely connected with Russia, and their conclusions about the referendum are nothing more than a continuation of Russian state propaganda. Meanwhile, Russian propagandists still cannot decide why their army is being defeated on the territory of Ukraine. Thus, they constantly recall that not Ukraine is fighting Russia, but NATO member states are fighting, thus trying to humiliate the morale of Ukrainian soldiers. In particular, the correspondent of the Russian state television company Yevgeny Podubny writes on the Russian state propaganda resource Russia Today that it turns out not Russia fights against Ukraine, and this is NATO fighting against Russia on the territory of Ukraine. Our opponent is not the Kiev regime, it is the North Atlantic Alliance. I quote Pulse 3 Telegram channel. The Russian army, in the format in which it conducted a special military operation, is difficult against the entire West that came out against us in Ukraine. At the same time, another lie that is constantly heard from representatives of the Russian state is an attempt to diminish the number of casualties they suffered during the war against Ukraine. In particular, Russian Defense Minister Shoigu said that the number of killed Russian servicemen does not even reach 6,000, although the Russians themselves have already counted 15,000 coffins, which were sent from Ukraine to Russia. And this is not counting private military companies, as well as mercenaries from the so-called LPR and DPR, who also suffered losses by starting this war against Ukraine. Thus, trying to humiliate the Ukrainian army in stories that Russia is at war with NATO, some military correspondents of Russia admit that their troops are not able to resist the Ukrainian military specifically. So propagandist Kots wrote in his Telegram channel that the Ukrainian military without any problems tracks all the flights of Russian combat aircraft and shoots them down. But in Russia itself, mobilization continues, and propagandists try to reduce the protest wave. They began to attack those who organize these protests, calling them, think about it, Banderites. I quote literally, pro-Bandera actions took place in Moscow and St. Petersburg under the guise of so-called pacifist rallies last week. That is, Russian propagandists try to automatically push to being enemies all those who opposed the war and against the desire to go to the territory of Ukraine to die, in order to save their lives. I can only add that the more Russians protest against military aggression and against mobilization, the higher the chance to save their lives. Therefore, I call Russian citizens to continue to protest on the streets of Russia in order not to get into Ukrainian soil as corpses. And finally, about the absolute fake spread by Russian state propagandists in the Colonel Kassad Telegram channel with the number of subscribers under 1 million people. The president of Ukraine is quoted as saying that he is ready to implement the Minsk agreements if Russia withdraws its troops and stops the farce with sham referendums. In fact, this is a fake message of a fake page that imitates Radio Liberty, and it is very simple to verify this. Propagandists made a mistake in the name of the months in Ukrainian by writing September with 2 letters N, Veresen. This once again proves that Russian propaganda is primitive and is designed for the most unpretentious audience, which is not able to conduct even an elementary critical analysis of what it sees before its eyes. The traditional call at the end of the briefing is to trust only a proven source of information, not to believe Russian propagandists, to trust the Ukrainian teleson, the Ukrainian political and military leadership. See you.